In today's video, I'll build the RO.43 aircraft. This will be the final video in the RN Roma build series. The RO.43 aircraft has its own plastic sprue, which contains all of the plastic parts that will be used in today's build. All of the struts that connect the pontoons to the wing will be replaced with photo-etch parts. This is quite good because these parts, when molded in plastic, are very out of scale. So photo-etch will give a more in-scale appearance to these structures. There are also these structures which represent struts and wires that will be used to support the upper wing. Almost all of the photo etch, apart from this small window piece, will be found on the eye sprue. This is also a special video in the sense that it is the final video in the RN Roma build series. Once this aircraft is complete and installed upon the ship, I'll do some minor touch-up to the superglue that was applied during the process, and that will bring an end to this build. For the construction of the RE2000, I started by painting the canopy so I could test the scratching out of the windows. But as I mentioned in that video, that was probably a bit of a mistake, and I should have completed the assembly of the aircraft first before attempting to remove the paint from the windows. So in this video, I don't repeat the mistake from the last aircraft, and I begin the process by removing all of the plastic parts from the sprue and then preparing them so I can assemble the aircraft fully before painting it. After removing the plastic parts from the sprue, they can be cleaned up. In this case, there are protrusions other than those which connect the part to the sprue. These are the plastic struts, and of course they are being replaced with photo etch, so they can also be cut off during this process. After removing the majority of the excess plastic, I use a fine file to smooth off the edge and then 1000 grit sanding sponge to give it a good finish. Once the parts have been cleaned up, assembly can begin. At this point in the build, I will not be installing the propeller. One of the other things that I realized during the construction of the RE2000 is that the propeller is quite easy to knock off while handling the aircraft. So I'm going to leave that until much later in the build and only put it on at the very end. I start by placing the two halves of the fuselage together, and then I apply extra thin plastic cement to the seam line to bond the two halves together. To ensure that the two halves of the fuselage are in good contact, I secure them together with some tape. While the glue on the fuselage is drying, I can attach the cowling to the front of the fuselage. Once again, I use extra thin plastic cement to glue it in place. After letting the fuselage dry for a few hours, I remove the tape and proceed to install the wing. The wing for the RO.43 comes in a single piece, unlike the RE2000 where that wing came in two pieces. A single piece for the wing is very welcome. This way it will be much easier to ensure that the wing is centered correctly and symmetrical about the center line. Due to the difficulties that I had with the extra thin plastic cement and the horizontal stabilizers on the RE2000, I've decided to glue the wings to the RO.43 using Revell Contactor Professional. I found that Revell Contactor Professional dries a lot more quickly and creates a stronger bond than the extra thin plastic cement. In this case, I use a toothpick to apply the glue to the model, and then I place the wing over the glue and press it down to bond it in place. After installing the bottom wing, I then move on to install the horizontal stabilizers. Once again, I use Revell Contactor Professional. For the same reason, it is going to give a quicker and stronger bond than the extra thin plastic cement that I'd used in this location on the RE2000. Another option would be to use super glue, but super glue I think will bond a little bit too quickly on this, and I'd prefer to have time to maneuver the horizontal stabilizers to ensure that they are positioned correctly and symmetrical. After letting the wings and horizontal stabilizers dry for a few hours, the aircraft is strong enough to be handled for me to install the photo etch struts to support the upper wing. The upper wing sits slightly forward of the lower wing, and there are struts that need to protrude out of the fuselage, which basically means these structures of struts and cables that I need to install on the wings need to be positioned in a specific orientation. And of course, they need to be symmetrical for either side of the wing. Essentially, I need to be careful or the struts will not align with the upper wing. So before gluing, I perform a test fit. You can see how the wing will sit on top of these struts. and then I prepare to glue these struts to the wings with super glue. After positioning the struts in the correct position, I apply extra thin super glue to the struts using a wire. I then perform a test fit with the upper wing, and I'm not quite happy with how the struts are aligned with this wing. They're a bit too close to the edge and it's peeling out a bit. The wing doesn't fully cover the entirety of the top of the strut, so I'm going to need to reposition it. I'm able to reposition it a little bit on the wing and get it into a position that I am happy with. I then move on to installing the struts on the other wing. Once again, I position the struts dry and then apply extra thin super glue using a wire to bond the struts in place. After gluing it in place, I am not happy with how it's sitting, so I cut the struts off again and reapply them. After sticking down the struts for a second time, I am happy with its position. I'll move on to installing the photo etch that outlines the window on the fuselage. I'm doing it at this point before I install the upper wing, just to give me a little bit better access to that part of the aircraft. There are markings on the fuselage which indicate where this metal frame should go. So I place the frame on the fuselage dry, and then I grip the fuselage and the frame with tweezers, and then apply extra thin super glue to the edge of the frame with a wire. The process is then repeated for the other side of the aircraft. The upper wing is now ready to be installed. I place the upper wing dry on the fuselage and align it with the photo etch struts. I then use extra thin super glue applied to the struts to glue the struts to the upper wing. And then I apply extra thin super glue to the seam between the plastic fuselage and wing to bond the plastic parts together. While the glue for the struts and the wings is drying, I can then move on to folding the structure for the center pontoon. There are only 4 straight bends on this part, with a little bit of glue required to glue it together at the single seam line to make it into a single strong structure. I place the 2 sides together and then apply extra thin super glue with a wire. The order in which I glue the strut, the pontoon, and the aircraft together is somewhat important. My thinking here is to do it in a way such that I'll have the easiest time of getting a good result. So instead of gluing the strut to the pontoon and then pontoon to the aircraft, I'm going to glue the strut to the aircraft first. And this comes down to having visual markers to determine where parts should be placed. After removing the plastic struts from the pontoon and cleaning up that part, it is very difficult to see where the struts should actually sit on that part. However, it is clear that the struts should sit directly underneath the wing on the aircraft's fuselage. So it's far easier to locate the correct position for the strut on the aircraft than it is to locate it on the pontoon. So that's why I'll start by installing the strut onto the aircraft instead of the pontoon. Then, once the strut is glued down and dried on the aircraft, I position the pontoon dry on the strut. I then look at the painting guide to determine how far beyond the front of the cowling the pontoon should extend. The final consideration when installing the pontoons is to ensure that it is sitting level on the struts. Once I am happy with the pontoon's position, I apply extra thin super glue to the base of the struts to secure the pontoon in place. There are then 2 smaller pontoons that go on the tips of each wing. Once again, it is easier to attach the struts to the aircraft before attaching them to the pontoon, especially in this case where the pontoons are very small and it is very difficult to see how they should be correctly orientated. After positioning the struts on the wing, I glue them in place with extra thin super glue. To attach the pontoon to the struts, I apply extra thick super glue to the base of the struts, and then after carefully identifying the correct orientation for the pontoon, I place the pontoon onto the strut. At this point, the aircraft is almost fully assembled. The only thing that needs to be attached is the propeller, which, as I said, I'm leaving for later on in the build because it's something that's quite delicate and easy to knock off. So at this point, the aircraft is ready for painting. As with the RE2000, the aircraft is painted in Tamiya XF11. That is JN green. Effectively, it's a dark green. There are some details on this aircraft that will not be in the screen, but almost everything will be in this color. So at this point, there is no need to mask off anything. And I simply spray the entire aircraft in this color from all possible angles to ensure good coverage. After letting the paint dry, the windows can be scratched out. The windows on this canopy are a lot simpler than the windows on the RE2000 canopy, and they are also considerably smaller. So in this case, I have had to sharpen the tip of this toothpick such that I could effectively scrape out just the window. Fortunately, although these windows are very small, they are just simple rectangles, so they are not so difficult to scratch out. After scratching out the windows, there is a need for a little bit of touch-up, so I do that using a fine paintbrush. The aircraft is now ready to be covered in a gloss coat. This is the first gloss coat and will be used to create a smooth surface on which to apply the decals. It is important to use a gloss coat when applying decals, because if you apply a decal to a flat coat, little air bubbles will be trapped underneath the decal, and that will create a silvering effect. It will make it look like the clear parts of the decal are attached to a silver backing. Obviously, that is an effect that you do not want. You want the clear parts of the decal to be completely transparent. So to ensure that they are transparent, apply a decal to a gloss coat. Since this gloss coat is really only for the application of decals, I do not need to spray the entire aircraft in the gloss coat. But since this is such a small aircraft, I might as well. After letting the gloss coat dry for around a day, I can apply the decals. After cutting a decal off of its card, I place it in lukewarm water to dissolve the glue such that I can slide it off of its card backing. And to prepare the model for the decal, I place a small drop of microset on the model in the location where I will place the decal. Microset is a weak acid that will soften the decal. This will enable the decal to adhere better to the kit, and it will also enable it to move more easily into fine detail lines that are molded onto the kit. Once the decal is in place, I position it using tweezers, and once I'm happy with its position, I remove the excess microset. Once the excess microset has been removed, the decal will be fairly firmly attached to the aircraft. However, it does need to be sealed in with a varnish to ensure that it does not come off in the future. I then repeat this process multiple times as I work my way around the aircraft, installing the details on the vertical stabilizer and the roundels on the wings. While the decals are drying, I'll install the propeller. First thing to do is to paint the inside of the cowling. As before, I'll paint this in XF54 dark sea grey. This is the same color that I used to paint the propeller. I apply it to the propeller shaft that's already installed inside the cowling, and I let it run down towards the base. I do this to ensure that I do not get grey paint on the outside of the cowling. After a few minutes, the paint has dried on the inside of the cowling, and I'm able to attach the propeller. This was one of the photo-etch propellers that I had previously prepared when building the RE2000. To install the propeller, I apply a small drop of extra thick superglue to the top of the propeller shaft, and then I place the propeller on the top of the glue. After a little bit more touch-up after the installation of the propeller, the entire aircraft is ready to be sprayed in its second layer of gloss varnish. This layer of gloss varnish will seal in the decals and provide the surface onto which I can apply panel line. The gloss coat will help make the panel line run into the detail lines and also make it such that I can easily remove the excess. Of course, in this case, the panel line is being applied on top of decals, so this layer of gloss varnish will also protect the decals from the panel lining process. The intention with the panel line is just to bring out the detail. I do not like an overly weathered effect on my models, so I think it's important for me to put down a layer of gloss coat to ensure that I can remove the majority of the panel line, such that I can still have a clean looking aircraft at the end of the process. Since I will be applying panel line to all areas of the aircraft, it is important at this stage that I do give good coverage of that gloss coat over the entire aircraft. While the gloss coat on the aircraft is drying, I'll construct its cradle. This was also a part that had been previously prepared and painted. So it's just a matter of folding it up into its correct shape. It's simply an open bottom box, so there's nothing complicated about this. And I then apply some panel line to it to give it the same effect as the other parts of the ship. The cradle was painted in the same light grey color as the camouflage on Roma. That is a combination of Tamiya XF2 and XF19. After letting the gloss coat dry for a good amount of time, ideally overnight, I then apply the black panel line liberally all over the part. I'm not concerned about making a mess or ruining the part because I know that the excess can very easily be removed with mineral turpentine and that it is a very safe process. I also apply the panel line to the cradle even though I have not sprayed it in a gloss coat. For a part this small, you won't be able to notice the difference between panel line applied to a gloss coat or a matte coat. The primary reason why I'm doing this is because after applying and removing panel line, the paint is slightly darker and I wanted to match the rest of the ship, where I have already applied panel line to all of those parts. After letting the panel line dry for around 10 minutes, it can be removed. I wet an old paintbrush with mineral turpentine and then gently remove the excess. Despite waiting until the end to install the propeller because of fear that I would knock it off, I managed to knock it off anyway. Such is the nature of these parts that are so small and delicate. Fortunately, it's just the propeller and it came off cleanly, so I take the opportunity to clean up the excess panel line that is sitting on it, and then I reattach it to the propeller shaft. After letting the panel line dry for a few hours, the part can be sprayed in the final matte coat. The matte coat will seal in the panel line and give us the final effect for the aircraft. I am not going heavy on this matte coat. I want the aircraft to not be completely matted down. I want it to have an almost semi-gloss effect. So I think that is a better representation of what an aircraft would look like. I don't think a full gloss effect is appropriate for these aircraft, but I also don't think a full matte effect is appropriate for these aircraft. I think somewhere in the middle will be appropriate. After letting the matte coat dry, the aircraft can be installed on the ship. The first thing that you might notice is that I have removed the RE2000 and its stand. I decided that I don't want the aircraft facing the stern of the ship. I want it facing forward, along with the aircraft that sits on the catapult. And these little triangles that extend beyond the back of the cradle, they sit towards the aft of the aircraft itself. So if I change the orientation of the aircraft, I need to change the orientation of the stand. So I just pried it off with a knife and I will stick it down again using the same method as in the previous video. I apply extra thin super glue to the base of the stand and then I place the stand on the rails. To install the cradle for the RO.43, I first do a test positioning on the catapult. I want to be able to place the RO.43 on the cradle and have it aligned such that it is underneath the hook of the crane. So I just need to figure out exactly where that cradle needs to be placed to get it into the correct position. After determining that position, I apply a small drop of super glue to the base of the cradle and then place the cradle onto the catapult. At this point, I'm not going to glue the aircraft to the cradles. I want to be able to reposition them if necessary. So I'll just let them sit loosely on top. They actually do sit quite securely. They are kind of gripped on the sides by the cradles, so I'm not too concerned about them falling off when I handle the ship. And at this point, the model is complete, so I don't really need to handle it all that much. In fact, the only handling of these ships that I'll be doing in the near future is to take it out and photograph it to make a completed ship video for Roma, which will probably be released sometime next year. And with that, we come to the end of the build of the RN Roma and the end of this video. For the last year and a half, I've been releasing a video every 2 weeks on Friday, and I've done that without taking a break, which has been, in some occasions, quite challenging. So I'm going to be taking a break over December. Basically what that means is that the next normally scheduled release date for a video would have been the 30th of December, but I will not be releasing a video on the 30th of December. The next video will be released on the 13th of January. As a small YouTuber, I need your help to grow the channel and spread my videos around YouTube. The easiest way that you can do that is to like and subscribe. So if you like my content and want to see more, please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. Cheers.